Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. We're back to Estate Planning of the Rich and Famous, where we chat about celebrities in their estate planning, or lack thereof. Today's episode is on the CBS great Charles Kuralt, a name most will recognize, but if not, like I just hinted at, he's most known for his time spent on CBS, and even more specifically, a feature he did on CBS that was called On the Road, where, as it states on his Wikipedia page, Charles, quote, hit the road in a motor home with a small crew and avoided the interstates in favor of the nation's back roads in search of America's people and their doings, end quote. I love that. So, as we always do on these celebrity estate planning episodes, let's talk about Charles as a person first, and then I'll dive into what happened estate-wise following his death, which occurred in 1997. Originally hailing from Wilmington, North Carolina, Charles spent most of his childhood and adolescence in the state of North Carolina. And fun little fact, when he was in high school, you know those senior superlative things? Well, he won most likely to succeed. So he sure didn't do too bad for himself. So maybe his classmates knew he was gonna, do good, great things, whatever. So fast forward time, he ended up attending and graduating from the University of North Carolina, UNC. And after graduating in 1955, his first real job was being a reporter for the Charlotte News, which is a local newspaper in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. A couple years after that, in 1957, he started working at CBS as a writer, which, according to his Wikipedia, that made him the youngest correspondent in the history of CBS News. And I think he was like 25-ish at the time. Then in the 1960s, he spent actually a lot of his time doing reporting like all around. He spent some time in Latin America. He was based in Brazil doing that. He spent some time in LA, spent some time in New York City, and also spent time doing coverage in Vietnam during the war, as well as Congo during a revolution. Now, Charles ended up proposing a new project to his higher ups, and that's when On the Road was born. So, according to Wikipedia, he convinced CBS to let him try it for 3 months. Well, it turned into more than that, clearly, because as they say on this Wikipedia page, it turned into, quote, a quarter-century project with him logging more than 1 million miles. After that successful project concluded, Charles ended up on the CBS Sunday Morning News, and that was in 1979. From there, he was kind of all over CBS, honestly, just truly a staple for that network. But then at the age of 60, Charles kind of unexpectedly retired from CBS, but hinted at the possibility that that wasn't the last of his, professional, whatever endeavors. And about a year later, Charles was back, but not with CBS. He actually did some narration on a TLC documentary, as well as some hosting and broadcasting as well. Now, more personally speaking, he married a lady by the name of Jean in 1954. When he and Jean were both seniors in college is actually when they got married. While their marriage ended in a divorce in 1960, they did have 2 children, 2 daughters specifically, that they named Susan and Lisa. A few years after Charles and Jean's divorce, Charles ended up marrying a lady by the name of Susanna in 1962. They together did not have any children. According to his Wikipedia page, he, quote, refused to alter his habits in favor of healthier ones. He ate unhealthy food, drank and smoked, end quote. And in later in kind of summer of 1997, he had some complications from lupus and also had some heart issues going on, and he ended up dying at the age of 62. His then wife, Susanna, died just a couple years later in 1999. So after his death, an estate plan, specifically a last will and testament, was located, but something else was located. Charles had a bit of a secret life going on. When I was researching for this episode, I got to this whole part and I was like, wait, what happened? So just buckle up for this, guys. According to a blog by Spencer Law Firm in Pennsylvania, and by the way, the blog is titled Off the Road with Kuralt's Estate Plan, which is a genius title. It provided a super helpful play-by-play as to what happened. So here we go. Let's first meet Patricia Shannon. Patricia formally, but she went by Pat. Now, Pat and Charles originally met in 1968 while Charles was in Reno, Nevada, during a story about did I say 1968? I hope I'd said that. Anyways, they met in 1968 and they met in Reno, Nevada. And they met when Charles was doing a story about a park called Pat Baker Park. Now, Pat's affiliation to the park was that she was promoting and volunteering at the park. So from their original meeting, Charles and Pat maintained a nearly 30-year relationship or friendship or whatever you want to call it. Many of the sources out there describe Pat's family as Charles's shadow family. I've never heard of that saying, but that's what a lot of sources called them. And in fact, Charles provided Pat with significant financial support and help, and even held very close relationships with Pat's 3 children. Now, some sources out there also call Pat a mistress, and some call, like I said, Pat's family as Charles' shadow family. It seems like a lot of gossip or he said, she said, but what I can tell, they had a very close and private relationship, whatever that means. It was close. It was a private relationship between the two of them. Now, Pat, after Charles's death, she actually wrote a book, as a newspaper stated, to, quote, set the record straight and to ease concerns of her children, end quote. And in it continued to sort of dance around like what their relationship was, but did say that at a dinner post filming, Charles and Pat discussed Charles's wife and marriage, saying, quote, the slow ebbing of that marriage, which over the years became companionable, but never ended. And that was just a really interesting choice of words to me. So who knows? Moving on from whatever they had going on. So just a few months before Charles died, Charles actually sold, and I know you can't see me, but I'm saying sold in air quotes, sold with air quotes, a 20-acre parcel with a cabin located in Montana to Pat. Now, the thing is he sold it to her, but he also gave her the money for the supposed purchase price before the transaction. So after the transaction, Charles also asked for Pat to send him a real estate contract so that the other 90 acres that were nearby could also go to Pat as well. Now, that transaction was scheduled and supposed to happen in September of 1997. But if you're kind of following along in all these dates, he died in July of 1997. But prior to his death, however, he wrote Pat a letter. And he wrote the letter on the day he was admitted to the hospital, actually. And that letter became incredibly handy for Pat because after Charles died, Charles's wife, Susanna, filed Charles's will for probate in New York, which his estate, because that 90 acres in Montana transaction had not happened yet, his estate included that 90 acre, that was still in his name. Now, something to know is that if you have property in multiple states, you typically have to open probate in each state. So Susanna originally opened probate in New York, but because of this Montana acreage, she also filed a probate petition in Montana. Now, this is where things took a sharp left turn for Susanna, Charles's late wife. Pat ended up filing something with the Montana court alleging that the letter Charles wrote her when he got admitted to the hospital, that letter, should be considered to be a will or an amendment to a will, and that the 90-acre parcel, the 90-acre property should go to Pat. So what did the letter say, you ask? Well, I have it, so let's read it. It's dated June 18th, 1997. It says, "Dear Pat, something is terribly wrong with me, and they can't figure out what. After CAT scans and a variety of cardiograms, they agree it's not lung cancer or heart trouble or blood clot. So they're putting me in the hospital today to concentrate on infectious diseases. I am getting worse, barely able to get out of bed, but still have high hopes for recovery. If only I could get a diagnosis. I'll keep you informed. I'll have the lawyer visit the hospital to be sure you inherit the rest of the place in Montana, if it comes to that. I send love. I hope things are better there. Love, C." Would you believe me if I told you that letter, later in all the court battles, was found to be a valid codicil to his will? Well, believe it, my friends. And a codicil is like an amendment to a will. So it was determined to be valid and enforceable. If you're a nerd like me, I've added the case and the opinion of the decision in the source links for this episode. So go check it out if you wanna read through it. But things did not end there. Don't go so fast. So the will that Charles had actually made, like the main will, stated that all taxes should be paid from the estate, but even more specifically from the residue of the estate. Now, residue in my estate world is not like residue on your windshield. Residue means that it's the money in the estate after payment of specific bequests, which this Montana 90-acre parcel property was considered a specific bequest. So, because of that, another argument broke out. And that argument involved who was supposed to pay the death taxes from Pat inheriting this property. Was it Pat? Was it Charles's estate? Well, the court got involved in this one too. And ultimately, the court held that the estate, which at this point was going to Charles's two daughters because Susanna at this point had died. So the court held that the estate had to pay the taxes for the Montana property going to Pat. Whoa. Talk about rubbing salt in the wound. And that court case's opinion is also in the source links for this episode if you want to check it out. What a wild sequence of events. I think this celebrity estate planning episode may be honestly one of my favorites. I have done so many episodes at this point, and sometimes the episode's contents kind of all blur together in a way, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to forget about this one. What a doozy. So speaking of it being a doozy, let's talk about one of the biggest takeaways from Charles's estate. And there may be some ethical takeaways, like maybe not having this type of relationship when you're married. So let's talk more about a legal takeaway. Now, the biggest one to me, which is kind of a unique one, and maybe one you'll find interesting, is did you know that a married couple client is on paper a conflict of interest a lot of times for estate attorneys? Now, we typically will have a married couple, if we're helping them do an estate plan, waive the conflict of interest in an engagement agreement because most of the time married couples are usually aligned with their goals. Though with Charles, clearly he was trying to do something a bit, just a bit different. So it would have been immensely helpful for him to seek an estate attorney's advice and not waive that conflict of interest. Then that attorney could have helped him navigate how to fulfill his goal of leaving something to Pat, doing so in a way that would minimize or eliminate the fight that occurred between Pat and Susanna and the estate, and also could have likely cleared up the tax confusion thing too. Clearly, that's something, he likely didn't think of, the whole tax thing. And who knows whether he would have wanted Pat to pay the taxes or the estate, that ended up going to his daughters. but him working with an attorney and doing so in a much more proactive fashion than what he did, laying in a hospital bed trying to write this letter to Pat, him working with an attorney in a proactive fashion would have likely helped immensely here. Alrighty, let's wrap this episode up and shift to a sneak peek at next week. Next week, we're back to a cautionary tale episode where we chat about real life clients, real life cases that I or my office have actually worked on. Or maybe they are just generally good things to know and be aware of so that you do not slip up and turn into a cautionary tale one day. Next week, I have not decided yet what I'm going to talk about. This, I think, is 2 episodes, maybe in a row, maybe not. Regardless, I don't know what I'm going to talk about next episode. So, TBD, I guess it will be a little bit of a surprise. So, until then, Legal Tea listeners, take care and be